Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Crystal Bird, and it's a little awkward because I can't see your faces, but hi, and welcome to the case study. Hold on for a second. There we go. So it's nice to meet you, and I'm happy to share this case study with you today. What I'll be covering is right here. I'm going to give a little bit of background about my work and the progress that my team has made, struggles we're facing, and the main, illustration of lessons learned would be the per diem case study. And then I have a few other small case studies to mention. And then I'm going to recap and kind of say how we're moving forward based on what we've learned, and then give you some tips on how you can do it too. Okay, so just general background information is that in 2016, the GSA Office of Strategic Communication hired a company called Forum One, a digital agency, to consult on usability and analytics. We have 16 members part-time, and so we have about a 1 1/4 full-time staff member. So that is a really small resource. So we have really been working to focus that resource on the right projects, selecting the right projects, and making sure that whatever work we do is value add, that lends itself to the case study for digital governance improvement, etc. So, and so the challenges have been that it is a small resource, but the scope of the usability work includes any component of GSA's online presence, live or in development. So that was really helpful too, as we'll mention later. So until recently, though, we primarily focused on GSA.gov. Now, the contractual performance objectives with the Forum One group are tasks involved in actually doing research and analysis and providing recommendations for improvement. So the actual implementation of those recommendations are not included in the contract. And so that was a little bit of a snag, because as you'll see a little bit later, the fact that our hands were a bit tied when it came to implementing all of these wonderful usability recommendations. Yeah, that was a bit of a snag, but we have, we've learned, and we're moving on. So one of the things I can say is that to raise the design voice, you have to do a lot more than what is in the performance work statement for these type of contracts, especially if it's the type of contract that we have currently, where it's literally just doing research and making recommendations. Okay, so since we primarily focused on GSA.gov, these basic facts about the site may help you see how our site compares to yours and understand the context of the UX effort. GSA.gov is a complex site. The distributed authorship content model is a challenge in and of itself, because it is a decentralized model, and we have a small central staff that keeps the overall site up and running, while the services, staff offices, and region personnel create and maintain their own content. And the challenge comes in is because those stakeholders that are in charge of creating and maintaining their own content have been designated to do so, but may not be trained web professionals, and they may not actually have the performance incentive to make the content a priority. So it's quite a difficult situation with the distributed authorship. It impacts the quality of the content. Everyone is doing their own thing, which leads to an inconsistent message, tone, style, quality of writing, etc. And then, we happen to be, not surprisingly, with that model for the last 20 years since our site has been in existence, still in a very early stage of UX maturity, as many other government agencies are, which means that we are user-centered in our approach to design. only in a kind of a low level kind of way. In other words, it's not taken on a wide adoption across the agency. So that may ring a bell with you. It may, you know, sound similar to what you're dealing with, or maybe not. But that's where we are at GSA.gov. But there's a lot of hope, so stay tuned. The progress we've made so far, interestingly, at first it didn't seem like a lot because we started out measuring progress by counting the designs we'd influenced. And then we ran into some struggles that significantly limited our ability to influence designs. Mostly we've had small wins, and I'll highlight a few of those projects here. But this left us feeling discouraged, and so we developed strategies to mitigate the struggles. And now progress includes any and all activities that make us likely to be able to influence design. So we really feel excited about the road ahead. So mainly, the challenges are that we technically have authority. Like, we have a documented directive in our agencies that says the Office of Strategic Communication is in charge of monitoring and guiding progress on content. And we can shut down sites, or we can, issue guidelines, et cetera, but we don't actually have teeth to that authority. So what it ends up at the end of the day is we lack some authority. We have some authority, but we also lack authority. There's a question there. We definitely lack implementation resources. We have a small team of designers, front-end designer, and our content management platform developer who can implement. But for a site as diverse as GSA.gov, it's not really enough to support the scale of changes that would need to happen to make it completely user-facing. And then finally, I think, which is the biggest challenge, is that the underlying business process is not human-centered. So, often if we do a lot of work to come up with usability recommendations, then there is difficulty getting buy-in to implement those recommendations because it costs money to implement. It costs time, money, the staffing, of a person who might otherwise be doing other things. So the organization might not necessarily see that as a good use of time, because that's not the process. The underlying process doesn't necessarily value the experience of our customers. So these are our challenges. And what I like to do at this point, especially when we're presenting in person, is to stop and ask people in the room to raise their hand to say if they relate to those challenges. So if you could just somehow, I don't know, Alexandra, if you could help me, just put in the chat or raise your hand to say you share some of those struggles. Do you relate to those struggles? And I can't see your response, but
yeah, we've got a couple here, I see.
Okay. Well, yeah, so it's a little of a tough environment, but that's what we are, kind of our mission is as UX designers, is to solve problems. So we're all for it. We're game for it. And so how do we do that? Well, we know that to increase UX maturity in an organization, and of course UX maturity is the extent to which design decisions are done in a user-centered way. It's a time-tested fact that it takes creating a shared vision that executives can get behind. So you could, in essence, say that all of our work up until now has been building a business case to convince executives that this is something we want to do, that we want to value our content, that we want to value the effect that our digital experience is having on our brand, and we want to really invest in improving that experience. So this is very hard to do from where my team sits in the organization, but it's a hint that we have now realized that we must partner with activities where the shared vision is already in place in order to move forward. So that's what we've done. We have partnered with some broader authoritative initiatives, and for those projects which are not necessarily broad high-level initiatives, we negotiate up front that we are going to do UX. We will study your site, and we will, provide recommendations, but we get kind of their consent in advance that they're going to implement. They will agree to, implement the results. And we, of course, prefer to align with projects that are in agile development. And so all of that to say, that kind of is the situation, and the per diem lookup on GSA.gov was the most logical step in our first large research project, because it is the top task. So you may be familiar with this screenshot. Anyone who's ever traveled in the government would know what per diem is. 59% of all GSA page views. It's huge. It's not even close. And we track the page level customer satisfaction, and now the customer satisfaction is good. I mean, 83, that's like a B minus. So, but it could be better. So from a usability point of view, if this is our major task, that's driving in 60% of the traffic, we really want that to be more of an A plus rather than a B minus. So we had a good relationship with the product owner, so we knew we wouldn't run into any authority issues on this. So we decided to go ahead and make this our first task. So this was the original, and this is the original design. And the original design, if anyone is familiar with per diem, it is a little bit of a tricky lookup, or it was rather, because there was a long row of information for monthly values of lodging, and at the very end there was a breakdown for meals and incidental expenses. And time again, the usability tests would show that people were not able to find that meal and incidental expense all the way at the end of that row of lodging, or way down in the footnotes there at the bottom. And then if they clicked on the footnote, it would take them to another page where they would see this table, which it really wasn't clear how to use this double table to find the answer. And so we had a lot of ups and downs, but we've made some progress. You see, this was one of our first projects that we started out on in early 2017. We identified these target audiences, which is mainly, U.S. government, federal government employees, but all employees and all citizens of the U.S. who do any kind of travel, whether they're for state, local, or any kind of a private company, use per diem. So it's a pretty widely used tool. So anyway, we set up the test, and we tested them, and we analyzed the results, and we could tell there was this vicious cycle going on. People would look up per diem, like shown in the first block, and then they would go to this results table shown in the second block, which was that infamous long row of information with lodging followed by one single data point for meals and incidentals. And then that would lead them to another page, which they were confused. They didn't know how to use. So it was a loop. People would go round and round and round, as this diagram would indicate. And I actually have a video of that, but I am not going to show it because it's really long. It's about 3 minutes. But trust me, it was a lot of frustration. People were going around and around and around and around. So we began presenting the um, results to our internal design team. And there was a little bit of confusion around our roles and responsibilities. So we had to halt for a moment and we had to clarify our roles. Then we came up with what's called a RACI matrix, which is responsibility, accountability, consulting, and information. And that is, if you're not familiar with it, it's basically a process to say when you're working on a cross-functional team, who needs to be involved and at what level. So we basically built an embedded UX process within our team in OSC so that we could move forward. And so we were able to move forward. We implemented a short-term solution, and then we came to a medium-term solution. We were about to tackle the medium-term solution. We were in the process of doing that, and that's when we encountered a disagreement over design. But we agreed to do A/B testing. And so we did A/B testing on 2 different prototypes. The first image here will show you basically the situation that we were trying to deal with. We had, in the improved, revised medium-term solution, we are trying to separate out lodging from the meals and incidental expenses. And so instead of being, let me just go back here and show you this. Instead of being this one table here, where it's all lodging and one M&IE meals and incidental expense all on one line, which is very confusing, and having people have to go to a second table on a second screen, we revised it so that both tables would be on one page. The top table would show the lodging and the bottom table would show meals and incidental expenses. And that would be it. Someone could clearly see which was which, and they wouldn't have to, click all over the place. Well, we both agreed that would be a good idea. Everyone was on board, and the problem became how to handle situations when there were a lot of results in the tables. When there's a lot of results in the tables, then you're left with 2 tables with many rows. And the question became how to control the rows. Well, this is an example of California, which I think it has 33 rows of data for per diem lodging. And the UX team had one opinion and the front end development team had another opinion. So here's what the options were. On the left, version A was to control the tables showing a number of rows. If you see on the upper left of the box on the left-hand side, it says show 10 destinations. But on the right was the idea from the design team that nobody's going to care to show 10 rows or 15 rows or 25 rows. Just say show less or show more. Just simplify it and make it 2 options. So do we show the number of rows to be displayed in the table and give users that option of choosing number of rows? Or do we get it really, really simple and say just show more or less? So rather than argue, rather than, again, shut down again because we're in conflict, we decided that we would do an A/B testing. And the result was that it took less time to complete the task when we modified it to use the new presentation. You see round 1, round 2, round 3. So the medium-term solution was implemented, and the long-term solution would have been to completely rebuild this application, but it was on hold again due to resource issues. Now, let me take a moment. I want to go back over those slides because I believe that somehow my slides were mixed up. Um, okay, the winner of the A/B testing was the first version. You see that the second version on the right is version B, the version on the left is version A. So I just want to go back. I think I went by that too fast. Version A was the winner. Users strongly preferred the ability to control the number of rows in the table. They wanted to be able to say, I want to show 10 or 15 or 20 rows, and they did not like that option of showing more or less. It just didn't work. So we went with the first option, which was to show 10 or more rows, and we implemented it, and it worked. It decreased the time to find the total M&IE, and this is qualitatively speaking, by about a minute and 25 seconds, down from as much as 2 or 3 minutes. And this is qualitatively. I think we all kind of maybe know, if we're practicing UX researchers on this call, that there's different kinds of UX testing. There's quantitative and qualitative. Generally, qualitative is the most common type, where you test a number of participants, or rather you have a number of participants test the site, but it's usually maybe 5 or 8 participants, and it's enough participants that you can identify the vast majority of the issues, but it's not enough to say statistically significantly that the task took a certain amount of time to complete. So in other words, when you're talking about time, it's very important to, like, you know, say this was a qualitative test, and it says that it took about a minute and 25 seconds on average to complete this task, but we did not test enough participants to make it statistically significant. So I just wanted to make that point. So it took a lot less time to find the total M&IE. We could repeat this test using 20 or more participants, and then we could find out for sure, but we don't really have the resources to do that right now. We do have enough information to know that was an improvement. Also, just the task of finding the breakfast M&IE went down extraordinarily to, you know, completion, the task completion rate increased, and the average time to complete task did also decrease. So if you look just those two tasks, they may seem like small things, like going from a 50% completion rate of finding the total meals and incidental rate in round 1 to 70% in round 3, and reducing the time on task to a minute and 25 seconds. That may seem like, you know, not that great, but for us, it's really great, because it's very hard to move the needle in our environment. So we're really happy about that. I'm sorry. Yes, and then this same thing for the breakfast. It's even more dramatic just for finding the breakfast amount. So we implemented that medium-term solution, which, you know, then we completed that 4th round of usability testing, which gave those numbers which I just showed. And then we did have a long-term solution, which would completely blow up the current per diem application and redo it in a more modern way, similar to how it's done on Travelocity and Expedia, although people don't travel that much these days, but that's on hold due to resource issues. So, you know, the bigger picture is just keep at it. You know, we hypothesized that we could make an improvement. We did make an improvement. They're relatively small improvements, but in the meantime, our work was getting noticed. So the lessons learned here. Establish a plan to collaborate on the implementation from the start. I think that was one of my biggest errors in the beginning, as I was just so excited after years of not having had a usability team. I was just so excited to have a usability team. I just knew, okay, great, we'll just start testing and we'll get this done. It was a little bit naive. From that time to now, we do always make an implementation plan from the start, and I would suggest you do too. Also, it helped to present our recommendations as timed phases. We had short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. To date, we have implemented the short and medium. The long-term is on hold, but in discussions and visioning discussions, we can always pull in our plans for long-term solutions, so that our managers and our leaders can understand where we'd like to go. It's always important to have a sense of where you'd like to go. So even if you can't implement right now, you can talk about the vision. So yeah, always fall back on data, be creative about ways to move forward, and just keep in mind, everything is building toward that shared vision. This is a little slide I put in to help you know when to use qualitative testing, because as mentioned before, there's two kinds of usability testing in general, qualitative and quantitative, and the A/B testing is generally referred to, defined rather as a quantitative testing method, where there's a version A, there's a version B, and there's some quantifiable outcome or measurable outcome that is involved for both versions, and they can be tested, and there can be a quantitative number to show which version was more effective. That's quantitative A/B testing, but in some cases it doesn't apply. It's just not possible for a variety of reasons, and that was true in our case. So this is qualitative testing, and you can keep this slide in your back pocket. Just a mini case study about another project we worked on very quickly, another section of our site that had to do with an acquisition vehicle. GSA is a leader in acquisition. We are one of the agency who really tries to help the other government agencies get best value for their acquisition dollars. And so we had a page for our Information Technology Schedule 70, which is a major GSA contracting vehicle. And we did some usability studies. We didn't just attempt, we did some usability studies. We had big plans, and then a long story short, we did a persona, we did user journeys, we made a big recommendations finding report, all of these deliverables. But then unfortunately, oops, we had a snag. They had a change in staff and they weren't able to implement. So then again, we were flexible, we went back, we refocused, we tried to do low-hanging fruit, and we did make a small improvement. We changed the contact block, which had not been arranged in a way that was easy to scan, and we just revised it so that it was very clear. Again, any small change you can make is going to help in this environment. And so we did, this is the revised page. The lessons learned there are, again, to break your tasks into subtasks and build an implementation task into the project, which we had, by the way, but their staffing changed drastically and they were no longer able to do it. So, it is what it is, and, everybody's doing their best. So just try and plan ahead as much as possible. And there's always a way to kind of pull out some silver lining in the end. We in this case, we just handled low-hanging fruit, and we count that as a success. One more bonus case study, the GSA.gov homepage. You may recognize this as our previous homepage prior to October of 2019. We were aware through analytics and customer feedback that users were having difficulty completing tasks from this homepage. And so we set about to make it more user task focused. We used a number of metrics and best practices to, in the short time frame that we had last year, to revise it to look more like this, which is what it looks like now. And it's lighter, it's brighter, and each one of the topics on the top half of the page gives the user a sense of what tasks they can complete under those topics. Now, that was a situation where we had a very short timeline to make a design change. And so we went ahead and did it, and then we used A/B testing to confirm that the design change was successful. Okay, and so we compared the old with the new, and I apologize for this being really small print, but basically the left side of each one of these graphs is the version A metric, and the right side is the strongly prefers version B metric. And as you can see, there's a tall column on the right side of all three of these graphs. So for ease of use, as far as conveying GSA offerings and as far as visual appeal, participants strongly favored version B, which is currently what the site is. That's version B. So basically, in a nutshell, we had, without having specifically done any recent testing on the homepage, we had enough data to indicate that the homepage could use reworking. And then we went ahead and reworked according to best practices, and then we confirmed. It's always good to confirm. And so it's a very impactful, high visibility choice. So it's important to have that evidence in case we have been challenged. One very last thing, this is a bonus tip. Even if you're not actually redesigning a site, let's say you're redesigning a survey, as I recently have been working with our Office of Customer Experience, we came to a difference of opinion, again, about our survey question that is geared toward getting users' feedback on the content of a page. So on the left is the version that I recommended. On the right is a version that a team member from the Office of Customer Experience recommended. And so rather than continue to go back and forth and have long discussions, it was agreed that we would use our customer survey tool, which the one we happen to use is Qualtrics. We would use it to deliver both questions. So once this survey goes live, I expect sometime next month, the survey will go live. If you happen to be on GSA.gov and you choose to provide feedback to us, you may, for question 3, get either version A or version B. And so that was kind of like a very diplomatic way of handling it. And I feel like, really proud that we're at that point in our organization where we can rely on the data to make some important decisions. And when this data comes back from these 2 questions, we'll be able to sit down and have a conversation about which question is more effective. And we can make a decision based on that. And, that's it for the case studies. I just want to say, basically, we've learned we have to partner with high-level initiatives and advocate for improved UX and design integration. There is a lot of high-level initiatives going on in the government right now. I'm sure everyone on this call has heard of the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act. GSA is taking a lead on that. That has really spurred a lot of movement, and we are forming a digital council. We are trying to come up with a vision, meaning a visual vision, like prototypes of what the future GSA Gov could be, as the front door of the agency to really help the customer base to navigate the many, many, many different sites that are in the GSA web ecosystem. And I continue to advocate for UX and design integration, both within the agency and outside the agency in events like this. You can do the same thing too. I'd recommend you get an executive champion. If you're going to do a digital design, really try hard to incorporate a usability review in the development cycle, and find teams that you can align with that agree to incorporate usability, and get your agreement to actually do the implementation and a letter of intent up front as well. And just mainly stay encouraged. We're all in this struggle together. As we know from current events, it's very hard to move the needle in the government. Even when it would seem as though evidence clearly points in one direction, there's a lot of politics going on, and it's really not necessarily anything you're not doing that it's causing things to go wrong, or the change not to happen in the way that you would like. So just put things in their proper perspective. Just consider everything as a win. And if you're dealing with a low maturity situation, and stay connected and keep hope alive. That's it for me. I hope some of it was helpful.
Crystal, that was fantastic. Everyone, this is Kelly Holden from the CFB Community of Practice. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm going to open the field up for questions right now. Crystal, I appreciate everything you were just talking about, and I can relate to so much of it. I definitely raised my hand when you asked. And it's true. It can definitely be frustrating, but it's nice to hear stories of people pivoting from that, or your team pivoting from frustration to actually getting something out there. So that's really great. We do have one question in the chat right now from Jacqueline. She's asking, when you're talking about the qualitative testing, where did you find the users to participate in your qualitative testing, and how did you recruit them?
Oh, great question, Jacqueline. So recruitment is always a big issue, because the best practice would be to recruit participants who represent your actual users, and that is what we try to do. So in the case of all of the GSA Gov work, we focused on the federal employees as our primary participants. And so we have a subscription to a usability platform called usertesting.com. We have an enterprise subscription to it through our contractor, Form 1. We have an enterprise subscription, and usertesting.com offers its own pool of pre-vetted test participants. So literally all we have to do is write a screener to say, A, do you work for the federal government? B, do you travel? Do you, or C, do you plan travel for other people? Or are you planning to travel yourself for the first time? Like, we would ask all of the questions that would be relevant to getting someone who could realistically approximate someone who would be an actual user of per diem in this case. So we actually have the recruitment built into our usability as a software as a service. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool tool. I know that CFPB has another tool that's very similar to that, but it's so nice to be able to kind of just, pick up and not have to do all the work of sending something out there and getting everyone kind of on board. And Jacqueline does say thank you for the answer. I think it definitely responded to her question. Does anyone else have any questions while we're on the phone? Amazing. Crystal, thank you again. That was such a fantastic presentation, and I loved all the bonus ones. It's so great to see something too, like the per diem. I know we've talked about it before, but it's so great to see it and be one of those users and see that it's being tested on to improve as a product.